This is a reading from the Autobiography of Maria Valtorta. I believe all of this demonstrates that, while remembering all the suffering my mother has unjustly occasioned me, I harbor no hatred, resentment, aversion, or even indifference towards her, but possess a great love, for only a great, perfect love is able to go on loving without receiving any love in return. You are quite right, Father, in saying, the signs speak, and he who listens understands. And that's really the way it is, provided the one listening does not have a piece of flint for a heart and a piece of pumice for a brain. Whoever is endowed with a good heart, good sense, and reasonableness, as you say, understands much concerning the sorrows of his fellows. I thus realize that it was precisely the Lord's goodness which brought me into contact with you, and I praise him for it. Your letter towards the end cheered me with the description of your work raising animals. I, too, am a capable animal raiser of domestic bipeds, and, while giving them care and affection, do not go soft either to the point of falling into that stupid sentimentalism of hysterical women which keeps them from killing and eating a chicken or a pigeon they have raised. I did not kill them, for I am not able to, but I had them killed, if they were superfluous, and ate them without scruples. It is their fate. Besides, and if one recalls that the same occurs, except for being eaten, with so many men in these times of savage wars, I regret taking a life. Even that of a flower is sacred to me because it has been made by God. But when we need, and good sense so require, I do not hesitate to act as necessary, eliminating without neurotic swoons or moans that life which is not useful, but rather an element of disorder for other lives. When I was a child I did. Then I would start to cry if a chicken I was friends with was put to death. You know. And the parenthesis closes. I shall now resume at the point I left off. I was saying then that after that dream, even if desires for suicide and sensuality assailed me, I managed to repel them. This is already a great deal. It is the first step on the way to redemption. Rather, it is not even a step. It is simply straightening oneself up after having fallen and lain in the mire, getting back on one's feet and making an effort to wipe off the coat of slime. I still had black hours when I was powerfully tempted, but especially as regarded temptations of sense. I no longer wished to do evil. The devil sang me his bewitching song and evoking unknown delights, which could have been mine if I had wanted, but I knew now how to repel even the wish to experience them. My soul and my will did not consent to his machinations, sowing the seeds of reverie. When my poor soul, still weary and weak from the great moral illness suffered, felt led to abandon itself, Jesus' words sounding in my heart fortified me like a cordial. The temptations to suicide were harder to overcome, for I was continually led towards them by the steady, corrosive trickle of all the moments in the day. How I wished to die! How joyfully I saw breathlessness and palpitation increasing in me. I thought that the malady I felt asserting itself in me would soon take me to the tomb. Poor human judgment, how quick you are to blunder. Heart trouble did come, increasingly. Other illnesses were joined to it, but a quarter century of suffering, I'm still here. Now I would say that the end is near. I hear a murmur of song becoming clearer and clearer, and it is the most gentle imitation. The same you pointed out to me yesterday. Surge propera amica mea, colomba mea, formosa mea, et veni, iam enim iems transit, vox torturis audita est in terra nostra, surge amica mea, speciosa mea, et veni. But when will the hour of liberation come? Oh, and this quote in Latin was from S.G., chapter 2, verses 10 to 13. But when will the hour of liberation come? When, sweet Jesus, whom today I see so well? I did not tell you this morning, because if I had told you, I would have started to weep for joy, and I did not want to, so as not to cause my very suspicious mother any suspicion. But since this morning I have had the vision of Jesus. He is standing and holding out his hands to me, smiling. He is encouraging me to suffer with his smile. But when will he go even further and take my soul with a kiss to bear it off with himself? But this is perhaps selfishness, a longing to come down from the cross. No, Maria, You mustn't do that. There is still so much prayer to be offered for those who do not pray, for those who are troubled. There is still so much to suffer before the cup is full. Jesus is thirsty and must be given a drink. Souls are thirsty and must be given a drink. And only liquid able to quench Christ's thirst is love. And the only liquid able to quench Christ's thirst is love. And the only liquid able to quench soul's thirst, the thirst of their needs, is pain. Love and suffer, my soul, to fill the chalice and quench Christ's divine thirst and soul's human thirst, and give them the strength to rise towards heaven, towards God, which is even more necessary than the graces to meet the everyday needs for the sake of which all strive. However, no one had the slightest inkling of my inner struggle, and who could I have spoken to? With father it was useless. With mother it was dangerous, in addition to being useless. With my boarding school friends and the sisters, useless as well. By letter certain things are expressed poorly, and then there was the censorship of the replies. I had no female friends in Florence, or elderly, good people who could understand and guide, and then I would not have spoken. I am very particular about my feelings, even if good ones. Just imagine, then, what happens with those which are not good. Mario was far away, and then with him a young man now nearly 20. I certainly could not talk about such things. He had understood that I was very sad and inclined towards death, and he sought to cheer me up with his sincere affection. But he was far off and did not know the extent to which his good and fraternal friend was suffering, the one who in his presence tried to be pious, calm, obedient, and so on, in order to serve as an example for him. I had not found a priest of the kind needed in my case. I have had to arrive almost at death to find him. So I struggled and suffered utterly alone, clenching my teeth, laboring twice as hard, with a poor, crucified smile on a face that would have wished only to weep. But to weep, I had the night. This is Maria Valtorta at age 19. And this is a picture. It says, "When I was not happy," 5/20/16, so May 20th, 1916. "When I was not happy, but at least healthy," is the annotation we read on the back of one of the two photographs taken on the same day, in which Maria Valtorta is the first from the right. Her mother is also recognizable, second from the left, in the first photograph, and at the center in the second. The cousin and the uncle. In the summer of 1916, my cousin Giuseppina came to stay with us to get over a dangerous adenitis and mastoiditis. She was the daughter, at least let us hope so, of the uncle I spoke of earlier, mother's brother, the one who had pushed me into boarding school with his arrival. I had never seen her because she had always been away at school to remove her from the poisonous proximity of her mother and her aunt. She was 20 then, and I 19. I loved her even before having her with me. Mother had told me that she would not be making any new dress or hat for me that summer because she had to think of Peppina. We were not in a position to be inconvenienced by having to renew 2 summer wardrobes. But though my mother spoke to me with unusual sweetness to make me swallow what she deemed must be a toad for me, that is, my cousin's arrival, I would have agreed to go naked, provided I could always hear her speak that way. Just imagine how far I went along with all her proposals. Among other things, detached as I now was from everything and inclined towards death, I was even more opposed than before to all coquetry. And besides, the idea of having a cousin of my own age with me, a former boarding school student like myself, educated by sisters of the same order, oh, how many things aroused my enthusiasm. I proposed to love her like a sister, and I did. She came here to Viareggio with her father. My uncle stayed for a few days and then went back to Bergamo, to the hospital where he was the librarian, in addition to being an inpatient for life. Peppina remained. We grew quite fond of one another. In her honor, I must say that, though born of a bad egg, and having continued in that atmosphere until the age of 8, She never gave me any cause for being scandalized. She was a bit thoughtless, but at 20 we are all more or less that way. We took lovely strolls with my father, bathed, and so on. 2 other little cousins were with us, both boys, aged 14 and 8, from the Venetian region. They had come there for the baths, since the Adriatic was not very calm then. For quite some time I had not been comforted, as I was that summer. Among other things, because my cousin was, for the time being, very devout, she often went to church. St. Andrew's, our summer parish, and I went with her. Mother did not dare to oppose her niece, whose affection she wanted to attract. Here I must tell you something which may not really be connected with my story, but I think it is not completely unrelated. I greatly loved our little house on Umberto I Street, where I had entered the first time at the age of just 7, and I had always felt very good there. That summer, I felt uneasy. Why? Heaven knows. I couldn't even tell you exactly what I experienced. I never felt alone. Let me explain. Even if I was at home alone, which sometimes happened, I felt as though someone was around me, invisible but present. And, fearful as I am of what I am unfamiliar with, I was afraid. When I told her, Mother, as usual, scorned and reproached me. But neither her scorn nor her reproach sufficed to make me braver or keep me from always feeling that mysterious presence. One night, August 17th, 1916, when, after having had a good laugh with our little cousins, we had fallen asleep in our 2 small beds like 2 big babies, we were awakened by the tottering of a heavy platform placed in the window opening. My dog that slept with the 2 of us growled. I turned on the light, afraid that it was an earthquake, but the cable for the light was motionless. I turned it off, and with the easy repose of youth, we went back to sleep. About half an hour, 3 very heavy blows, as if by an open hand banging on the door, we heard at the entrance to our room. Even before turning on the light, while bathed entirely in an icy sweat, I said, "Grandma, is that you?" I don't know why, 13 years after her death, still between sleep and waking, I thought of her. The whole house was filled with din. Father, my cousins, and Mother came running. Father and the cousins asked only the natural question as to what that din had been. If only we had at least known. But Mother really grumbled, and I think she is still convinced that we girls were responsible for that jest. Just think that we were trembling so that we ended up in the same bed to comfort one another. In mid-September, my little cousins left, and the 2 of us remained with my family. While we were busy packing to return to Florence, a telegram arrived announcing that my uncle was dying. It was September 30th. My mother left with my cousin for Bergamo. I stayed with Father. In those days when I was alone with my father, I felt the invisible presence of incorporeal beings more than ever. I had a black fear, but kept silent so as not to be mocked, though good-naturedly, by Father. One night, I took refuge with him because it seemed to me that along the wall, observe that the 2-story house rose above the 2 flanking it, and my wall was not in contact with any other house. It was as though the surface was being rubbed by hands, a sound like the one a mason makes when he strips a wall. Mother and Peppina finally returned. My uncle had happily gotten over pneumonia. We left for Florence and went to live in a new apartment because the other one had been damaged by an earthquake. The new house was sad, on Pippo Spanno Street, close in amidst houses, both the facade and the interior. But even from there, I saw the Virgin on the door of the Jesuits' convent and was close to this church. The winter passed in this way. I got along well with my cousin, but skirmishes began between my mother and her. My mother, who found me guilty of 1,000 thoughtless acts, had realized that her niece was guiltier than her daughter, and wanted to use the same severity with her as with me. But Peppina was not Maria. She thus produced the opposite effect. Peppina found ways to stay away from the house as much as possible. She got a job teaching practical skills, for she was very good at women's work at the St. Catherine's Institute and at the Sunday schools. She thereby earned a sum to set aside and remain distant from Mother. I thus lost her company for many hours each day. Meanwhile, the war continued, and restrictions began to make themselves felt. Father, Mother, and Peppina helped themselves to eggs and condensed milk, noodle soup, and pancakes fried in lard. Though possessed of a stomach that is hearty in its way, that is, still able to digest a plate of raw vegetables, but not a cup of milk or fried food or eggs, if I consume them today, I must avoid them for at least 10 days afterwards. I began to suffer hunger. Until 1919, I never drank black coffee, and thus lacked even that, with its corresponding sugar, to sustain myself. My moral sorrows and hunger together weakened me more and more. In June 1917, my uncle, Peppina's father, arrived unexpectedly. He had given notice at the hospital, and in such painful moments he would come to us. Mother went into a rage. But it was now done. Though remembering the whims of this uncle, I welcomed him. Provided I could have someone to love, I would have loved even the devil. At first, all went well. In July, we came to Viareggio, but I understood I could no longer undergo the baths. I felt I was dying on entering cold water, and only a year before I had had over 100 baths. My heart increasingly gave way. Mother reproached me for not taking the baths. I told her they harmed me. She replied as usual that I had imaginary fears. Amen. Even more than the previous years, I also felt those strange, invisible presences in the house. But fortunately, that summer, the others noticed them as well. I then plucked up courage and said I did not want to stay in that house any longer. Frightened, Mother, though not wishing to say so, considering many other things as well, decided to rent it out. While waiting for the bather who was to spend August and September there, we learned from the neighbors that for 2 consecutive winters, the family we rented the house to, so as not to leave it closed, a botany professor with his wife and 2 daughters in their 20s, had practiced spiritism there. I draw no inference. I simply state that this was the first time that solemn incompatibility between spiritism and myself and my sensitivity to certain phenomena appeared. My God, what a scare. We returned to Florence on August the 10th. Peppina, backed by her father, was now more domineering. You are well aware of the fact that similar characters never get along well. The domineering must always be faced with the docile, the proud with the humble, and so on, in order to be able to carry on without fighting. But my mother, her brother, and his daughter had the same character. Hence, constant warfare, a hell. Meanwhile, Caporetto, the site of the Italian defeat in the battle lasting from October 24th to November 9th, 1917, during World War I. Meanwhile, Caporetto had come, and, given the great need, Delcroix, footnote 2, Carlo Delcroix, 1896 to 1977, mutilated, a great invalid of World War I, an effective writer and orator, and later a politician as well. Delcroix had delivered talks to exhort us women to enter the military hospitals, which had been left without, or with few, nurses. The first ones had gotten exhausted or ill, while the wounded increased to excess. To go into the hospitals had always been my dream. I could be useful, remain away from home, and, oh great hope, contract an illness which would take me to the other world. This is Maria Valtorta at age 21. As a Samaritan nurse. For if I was no longer tormented by the battles of sensual desire, I always was by the great wish to die. Not even mother's manners sufficed to pull me away from this desire. Indeed, I was the scapegoat for the nervousness produced in her by the dispute with her brother and her niece. And even my dear uncle, ever an atheist and original, did not lag behind in tormenting me. I thus had 2 of them on my back, not Peppina. She always treated me the same. Thanks to the eloquence of Carlo Delcroix, who still had fresh scars on his blinded face, and also in order not to cut a poor figure before other people present, Mother allowed me, too, to enroll among the Samaritan nurses, and so, on November the 15th, I entered a hospital for the first time. Here's a card printed for the Samaritan nurses. And the caption at the bottom says, Dolce come la mamma sua lontana, lo assiste e guida la Samaritana. So sweet, like his faraway mother, she assists him and guides him. the Samaritan nurse. The first day, rather the first morning, for it was a morning, on seeing myself observed by so many eyes, shy as I was, I stumbled and made a mess. I bumped into a night table and knocked everything to the floor, cups, glasses, bottles, etc. Fortunately, the wounded man had just picked up a watch and thermometer. That was my baptism. A bit noisy, if you will, and a bit costly, but the fact is that I got my nurse's crosses wet that way. I soon became skilled and capable, though. How my poor lads loved me. They were from the ranks, for I had asked the inspectress not to send me to a hospital for officers. I was going to serve the suffering, and not to flirt or find a husband. I certainly had other things to think about. I therefore wanted to go among humble soldiers, great only in their heroism and their patience. The sisters, daughters of St. Vincent, with the characteristic large hats, loved me very much, as did my fellow nurses and the doctors. In 18 months of hospital work, I never received a reproach or was treated rudely. I did my duty and was consequently loved and respected. I spent the best hours of my day in the wards. I went there every day, including Sunday, and remained from 1 p.m. to 8 p.m., and even longer if there were seriously ill and dying patients. After 2 months, I shifted to the isolation ward in the midst of consumptives and those afflicted with various incurable diseases. I thus had the second ward and isolation, somewhere around 200 beds. As the hospital was on St. Mark's Square in the Advanced Studies building, I always passed in front of the church and museum of St. Mark, and fortified my heart to face all the misfortunes I would have to witness at the feet of the Nazarene on my way there. And often in the evening I would enter the museum for a moment before it closed, and on the days of free admission to plunge into heaven after having been in the hospital purgatory for hours before the angelic tables of Blessed John of Fiesole. Living amidst such distress did me good. It progressively softened my heart, which had grown hard from excessive sorrow. It was as if the scales, similar to those covering tortoises, were falling, leaving my soul free for the flow of goodness. Among other things, having to lead so many poor men entrusted to me to God, gently forced me to draw nearer and nearer to Him. We had a very devout military chaplain, a Passionist. Footnote, it may have been Father Gregorio della Dolorata, Antonio Ceccarini, 1877 till 1931, who with his exquisite patience, gentleness, and tact worked real conversions. My young men listened to him a lot and were faithful to their religious practices. Every afternoon, towards 3, in the chapel, nearly on the roof, small but graceful, there was the Eucharistic benediction. The wounded who could move attended, a procession of crutches tapping along the corridors, walking sticks, arms in slings, bandaged heads. They went up the stairs, and the first to arrive entered until the little church was packed. The others pressed in from outside on the landing and on down the stairs, and they sang. What fine choruses of male voices! It was moving to hear them sing with such faith and emphasis, those reborn men who had combated and killed in the savage struggles, and now, having come back like big children, weakened by misfortune, they managed to become good, simple, and trusting once again, as when they had gone to church in childhood with their mothers. I still seem to be hearing those songs. We love God. Prithee, restrain the bold tongue. I shall go to see her one day, and so many others. Jesus availed himself of my wounded lads as well to speak to my heart. I wept hearing those songs, but it was now a different kind of weeping. It was a weeping invocation, weeping lavacre, weeping which was a stairway, the first step of the staircase to ascend to God. On the eve of feast days and on Saturday they confessed, and the next day they told me they had received communion and asked me if I also had. Poor boys, how much good has come to me from them. They often saw I was melancholy and did all they could to cheer me up. But I, too, gave them all the treasures of my woman's heart. I was a mother and a sister to them. I overcame moments of repugnance, impatience, and weariness because I loved them and was loved by them. And with satisfaction I tell myself I did my duty there as well. My conscience reproaches me for nothing, and I am sure because the letters of my sons, older than I, still attest to it. I would have a lot to say about my lads, but that would take me very far off the track. It is enough for me, however, to have told you that I acted uprightly in every way. There as well. Oh, it is immensely comforting to be able to say that you have acted well. I sometimes think that my dear, deceased boys are praying in heaven for their young little sister at the hospital and waiting for me above. Indeed, I think they will be close to me at the hour of death to help me, as I was close to them in their final hour.